after the wedding was done, she actually approached me and said, "Would you ever be interested in just doing this full time as a job?" And I went and I internshiped with her for just a couple of weeks, and I ended up proposing, if you don't want to do this anymore, I'll buy your company.
We document and share best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues.
What's going on, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX, and on this channel we are passionate about documenting and sharing best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues. Today we have a topic for you that we don't cover very often on this show, but I definitely think it's important, and it's one that I know affects a lot of people. And so it's going to be interesting today to dive into mental health, and to do that, I'm excited to welcome Jaclyn Watson from Jaclyn Watson Events. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you just got off stage just like not even a month ago almost?
Not even a month ago. Yeah.
You were at Cater Source, and this year round it was in Orlando, correct?
Yeah. So we were in Orlando for 5 days. We were teaching, we had one class. And then I was also lucky enough to be a presenter of one of the catering awards. And then I was also up for nominations too, for Best of Wedding and Designer of the Year.
Wow, that's huge. Congratulations on that. And
thank you.
Anyone who is in our industry knows about NACE, obviously, about TSC, the special event. And it's really cool, that they put that event on. And so that's awesome that you got to be. I know I got to speak last, maybe it was 2 years ago, when it was in Anaheim, a little closer here, and it was a really good experience.
Yeah, TSC and Cater Source are absolutely wonderful. And this year it was very inspirational. There were a lot of amazing speakers, and then I walked away feeling so inspired. Marcy Bloom actually presented as one of the keynotes, and I don't think I've ever felt such a passion come from somebody, and it was so great listening to her and to hear a fellow wedding planner go through the things that I go through as a planner. So it was a really great conference, and I'm excited for next year because it's in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, and that will be a really cool kind of middle ground, I think, for both East Coast and West Coast industry. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, it's gonna be epic.
Jaclyn, share with us a little bit how you got to be in the wedding and events industry. Give us a little bit of a personal background on you, and then we'll just jump into talking mental health.
Sure. So I've been doing this for over a decade. I actually got into this accidentally. I used to perform paddle balls and juggling, surprisingly enough. And I even performed for President Clinton at the Easter egg roll. So I always had a background in the creative arts and working with multiple other vendors and everything. So my husband and I got engaged way back when. I won't give the number. But one of the things that he said to me was, "Jackie, you need to have a planner because you are way too anal retentive to do everything yourself." So I got a planner and ended up still planning my wedding, and ended up at the end of our wedding actually buying her company out and starting my own business from it and flipping it a couple times, and to get into where it is a decade later up here.
Wow. So that is so funny that he said, "Hey, you need to get a planner," and you were like, "Nah, I'll just buy her company and start my own thing." Wow. So I just have, I know this is not on the topic of mental health, but as far as buying someone's business that was already running, was that really challenging? I mean, especially with such a personal nature of wedding planning, was that difficult when you bought that business?
Yes and no. The planner that I had, she was an absolutely wonderful person. I will say that. But she just wasn't in the mindset to be a planner. So after the wedding was done, she actually approached me and said, "Would you ever be interested in just doing this full time as a job?" And I went and I internshiped with her for just a couple of weeks, and I ended up proposing, if you don't want to do this anymore, I'll buy your company. I didn't at the time know what I was saying. I didn't even know how much it would cost. Lo and behold, I had saved up enough. And we basically swapped out, our names and some other little entities, and you have to get registered with the state. And there was a lot of hoopla. It took me about a year to successfully, buy that company and get it going and everything. But for all the small headaches that I had, it was very, very well worth it, and a great business move because it launched me into being a planner. And we all have to start somewhere as entrepreneurs in this field. So I started out really tiny, and now I only work with luxury clients, and I only work with 10 clients a year.
Wow. That's incredible. That's a very inspiring and I think non-traditional story from what I've heard. But one thing that's always fascinated me about this space is how the backgrounds of the different people who end up in this space end up kind of changing or giving something very special and very, specific in how they execute their business, because they're taking that past, experience and bringing it into their current experience in the wedding and events industry.
Absolutely.
Let's transition a bit and talk about mental health. I know, this is a topic that you're passionate on, and mental health, saying just the phrase like mental health or those two words.
It's scary.
It is. And it could mean different things to different people, right? Mm-hmm. So could you kind of unpack a little bit, why is it important for us to talk about mental health specifically in this industry?
So one of the things that I will say is I actually went to school, and beyond getting my business degree, I actually got my psychology degree as well. So to unpack this was really important to me because as a psychology major, I saw a lot of things happening in our industry. And it wasn't just surrounding the word mental health. It was also regarding people who had different diseases or different anxiety, different phobias, all those things that really is a faux pas to talk about in our industry up until the last couple of years. And then someone came into the industry, a wonderful girl and woman, actually, Sharisa, from Event Therapy magazine, and really just kind of blew open this Pandora's box that we couldn't all talk about, and made it okay and made it safe to talk about. And I think the biggest thing with mental health this today, or any other disability that you have, is the fact that people are scared to talk about it. People are afraid they're going to lose business, that people won't want to work with them, that they're going to get judged. And we're already in a really judgmental zone in this industry. So to add on something that's super personal and super vulnerable, I think is really difficult for a lot of people. So that's why I kind of got into making sure that I'm talking about it and I'm advocating. I also was a person who had a disability when I came into this field and wasn't overly welcomed with it. So it was important to share my story.
Jaclyn, I have a question, and you kind of started to touch on it a little bit, but why is it a faux pas to talk about maybe some of these disabilities? Or why do you think it is frowned upon? Or why do you think you're losing business or things like that? I know right before we started, you started to share a little bit, and then I was like, okay, let's get into it in the show. But why is it a potential detriment to share any issue that you might have?
So I think a lot of it is fear-based. I know I have lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. It doesn't, go to anybody else. It always stays with me. It's not catchable. But it's that fear of, oh my gosh, what does she have? And will I get it? That's fear number one. Fear number two, and this is both vendor and client related, is will she or he be able to do the job that they're being hired to do? And I think because there's not enough education out there about different disabilities like dyslexia, anorexia, bulimia, different autoimmune diseases like lupus, we all kind of have that really scary moment of, oh my gosh, what if this happens and that person can't do it? So it's an immediately shut down of, no, we're not going to hire them because we just don't know. And we have to have that somebody be really reliable. So I think it's a lot, like I said, is fear-based, and the fact that we're not educating these people, these potential vendors and potential clients, as to what it is. So that's where I'm kind of at with that.
Help me understand, because it sounds like there's really a fear-based response to your point, right? A fear-based response and a lack of understanding and awareness around some of these different disabilities or illnesses and how they might impact the service, which is what people are ultimately buying. Do you think there's any validity to that, or is it kind of more of a misunderstanding around the actual impact that some of these disabilities have?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a misunderstanding. Again, going back to education and us being, the person with the disability being open and honest about it. I know for me, I was very afraid to tell my clients, and I still don't, that I had that, because I really feared not being hired. And I was actually told by fellow vendors, you can't tell anybody. You shouldn't even tell anybody, that's your colleague, because they might not refer you and they might not want to hire you. So I really think that it doesn't matter if you have a disability like dyslexia. There are so many people in our industry that have dyslexia, that have high anxiety rates, especially after COVID, where we should feel safe to open up about it and say, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. I'm human. I'm not a machine. I want you to have the best day ever. I want to have the best vendor relationships. But listen, this is who I am. This is real life.
I'm curious. So from an education standpoint, what are some ways that professionals in our industry can educate their clientele without scaring them away? Because that's kind of what I hear you saying. Like you don't want to say, in fact, you're saying you don't even share with your clients, but how do we educate on it without that fear of like hurting our own business?
I think that's where the vulnerability comes into play. I really think, we have to start being honest, including me. And I am now. I have been very, very open with my clients for the last 2 years, and just be open to educating them on what it is that you have a problem with. And honestly, it's not their business. It's not nobody's business. If you have a disability and you want to share it, great. And then you should share it. I actually happen to share with my clients that I have dyslexia. And there is a reason I use stationers, because I never want to ever screw up a word. And one of the things that you have with dyslexia is you tend to write words backwards. So as a professional, I don't want my clients to ever feel like I'm not being professional because my writing is not the greatest. So I have to be honest with them and say, hey, listen, I'm a creative. I have dyslexia. I work really hard not to show it. But there are times where you're probably going to see it. And there are times where I'm going to say to you, this is not my strength. This is where we need to go to make sure that it's 100% perfect. And I think that from a psychology standpoint, I think as the person who has that disability, it's a very scary process to open up to a stranger or to a fellow colleague that you admire that you have this problem, for fear of judgment and for fear of not being able to get the job. And one of the things that I've learned through this entire process is, listen, if you don't want to work with me because I have a small disability that is very well managed or handled, then you're not the right client nor vendor. And I need to keep moving on.
Totally. So do you feel then by kind of identifying that, saying that, hey, I do have this disability, and then even educating on the impact that it will or won't have, right? That you can kind of more appropriately weed out who your tribe is almost?
Yeah, very much so. I had a client this year, super, super blessed to have them. And I didn't even have to say that I had dyslexia. She actually pointed it out to me. She's like, I work with people who have dyslexia and I see it. So I don't want to hurt your feelings, but do you have this? And I'm like, yes. And she's like, well, let's share. And we just had this powerful conversation of different ways to work with them versus me feeling scared to be vulnerable and tell them. So more often than not, I think if you're honest with your clients, they're going to be okay with it. I have had a couple clients that have come back to me with the question of, are you able to do your job? Absolutely 100%. And that's where the confidence level comes in that I think a lot of us in the industry tend not to have because we're so afraid of losing that money, right? Because we have to survive. And the last, 3 years have been crazy and we're going like gangbusters, but we don't know what's going to happen around the corner. So we have this really scared mentality, this scarcity mentality of whatever comes in, we have to do. So whatever we have to do to get that client, we have to do. And sometimes that is not sharing or not being open or being too afraid to do all of that. So it's something that I think will continue to happen because it's human nature. But it's also something that I think that we should feel safe in sharing and not feel like we're going to be reprimanded for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, what's your feedback on sharing that versus not sharing like that? So what I mean is, well, clearly there's a risk in sharing it that you might get turned down by some business or vendors or whatever. And that's good, right? Because you don't want to be working with those people. Excellent. However, is there a negative side to not sharing where it does impact your mental health?
I don't know if there's a negative side other than knowing that you're holding something in. The way I personally look at it is every single vendor and every single client is different. And I can usually judge, just like everybody else, of how well they're going to take something. If my clients are high stress, high anxiety, all over the place, and worry about everything, no, I'm not going to tell them because that's just going to make their fear even worse, right? And I'm there to calm them down. I'm there to do all the things that they need. So why add one more thing to their plate that they have to stress about? So I really think it's up to the vendor. And that's one of the reasons why I teach how to create an intimate bond with your clients, because a lot of us in the industry, I don't think get to that point. I think we look at that client as this is just another client. This is what we do and we're done. And I think that it really would behoove us to create really good intimate bonds with our clients, because then we can suss that out even better and know that, you know what, it's going to be fine to say something, or you know what, I'm just going to keep this because it's going to add a little too much stress. So let's not do that.
That makes so much sense. And having that level of understanding around who you're talking to, what you should share or not to like build into that amazing client experience is definitely, I can see how there's some touch points that could be had. Are there some, and obviously without going into your the depth of knowledge that you have on this topic, but are there some kind of very top of mind things that you have, some quick touch points that allow people to have that greater connection to kind of open up that conversation to decide if they should share or not?
Yeah. So number one that I see a lot is people don't vet very well at the very beginning. So one of the things that I really highly recommend is that you create a really solid questionnaire before you take on that client. So I actually have two questionnaires. I have one questionnaire that's about 15 questions. And we ask them everything from what do they do to what do they wear, what do they eat, what's their hobbies, what's their pastimes, how did they grow up, where did they grow up? And we really find out if they would match us. And then after that, before we even start planning, they get a 14-page questionnaire that really dives into who they are as people. And I'm one of the few that send that much of an in-depth questionnaire. Like I'll give my clients a whole week to fill it out because it's very personal. But there's a reason for that, because I want to create that intimate bond and I want to be able to say to them, you can trust me because I know all these facts about you. So if they're opening up to me, if they're sharing their vulnerability, then I know I can share mine. It's a two-way street. And if a client wants to be respected, then I'm going to give them that respect in order to get the respect in return. So that's my number one big tip is right at the beginning, really ask the questions. My second tip that I would say that's really important with creating that intimate experience is to take the time to be with your clients. If you take on 30 clients, it's really difficult and challenging to set aside a half an hour to just talk with your clients. And it doesn't even have to be wedding related. One of the things that I love about my clients, because we have such a deep bond, is that they'll actually text me from their honeymoon. They'll text me, hey, we're doing this. We just wanted to let you know we missed you. And that's such an amazing thing to have to say to them. Hey, listen, you're on your honeymoon. I'm not your planner right now. Go do what you need to do. But it shows that bond. And the great thing about that bond is that it creates referral after referral after referral because they want all their friends and their family to feel that. So really taking that time when you do start the process of working together and just setting aside even 30 minutes to say, hey, listen, let's just talk. Let's learn even more about you. How is your job going? What are you doing for work? Do you have any pets? Like, take that time to really get to know that client because now they feel special and now they feel like you really care. So those are my top two things.
I love that. Jaclyn, I have to say though, it was resonating with me. And then you mentioned the part about the 14 pager, right? And I want to bring that up. I think that's important because I was like, gosh, that's amazing. How do you get people to fill that out? Like I think about the clients that we serve, I don't know that many of them would fill that out, something that was that long, right? And I know there's a lot of people in our industry who I've talked to before who they are talking about reducing the friction. And you're intentionally creating friction.
I'm creating it.
Yeah.
And there's a reason.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, could you share with me that reason and maybe let's start there, and then I have a follow-up question to that, but it's very interesting.
The reason I do this long of a questionnaire is because it will tell me how serious this client is. If a potential client comes back to me and says, listen, I don't want to do this, I don't have time, then you're not my client. I am very dedicated and work with a very select clientele. And that is why I do that questionnaire. I'm not telling everybody in the industry to do a 14-page questionnaire, but I am saying to do a questionnaire that works for you, whether that be 2 pages or 14 or 20, you need to find that spot that makes you feel good and makes you feel secure. I think the other thing that people don't realize is when you send something like that, it shows that client how very serious you are. I'm not going anywhere. If I'm asking you all these questions, that means that I want to be really involved in your life. I want to create something for you other than just another average wedding. I want to create an experience for you, for your guests, and for all the guests that might potentially come to me later on so that they know that they're going to get the same quality.
And that's really powerful. I knew there was like a reason, like you had to be creating that friction intentionally to kind of give some guidance for your clients. So if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, that's great, Jaclyn, I currently am doing 50 weddings a year, right? Let's just say, or 30 weddings a year. And they're trying to figure out how they create some of that intentional friction inside their business, but maybe they actually, because of their pricing, they need to book 25, 30 weddings a year. What are some ways maybe they can start getting out of this space where they almost feel like they can't build in that friction because they don't make the money and they need to make the money? Like, how do we solve that problem?
Yeah. And I think this is something that happens a lot with photographers and with caterers, videographers, because it's all about quantity versus quality. And there are some amazing photographers out there that have absolutely outstanding work. But I think it kind of goes back to the whole pricing scenarios that are also not talked about in our industry very much. We have to charge what we're worth, and if a client doesn't respect that worth, then they're not really your client. Does it suck to lose them? Absolutely, it does. Have I lost clients because I charge more? Absolutely, I have. But in the long run, you have to ask yourself, do you really want that client? Because even if you charge the the amount that you want, it's probably going to be a lot more than what you thought it would be. So is it worth that mental health of, dealing with that stress and putting even more onto yourself? And then at the end, carrying out this wedding where you really didn't want to be there, but you only did it for a paycheck. Really sucks, because now your client sees that, your client sees that you're not in it wholeheartedly and that you're just doing this because it's just money coming in. So I think that's what makes this really different. And don't get me wrong, because I don't want to upset anybody. There is nothing wrong with having quantity, versus over quality. And you can have quality and quantity. But I think that it has to be really honed in when you do that. And it has to be really refined, because I think that it can be forgotten. I think that your guests can end up being an afterthought because you're thinking about how to keep everything the same for each and every person versus creating a really awesome experience and making it different for each client, because each client is different.
Mm-hmm. From a planning side, this makes so much sense because you're literally getting involved in their families' lives. You're such an integral part of their lives for, gosh, whatever your packages are, right? 12 months or 9 months or 16, 18 months, right? You have this piece of life that you're sharing with them. And so you're totally right. To your point, the more you know about them, the better service that you're going to be able to provide them is. For someone like a venue that might be in a environment where they are looking at their competitors to charge pricing, and I know planners do this as well, and you're looking at, you're looking at maybe startup costs, you're looking at, what it costs to produce your services, you're looking at maybe employees that you have, things like that. And to touch on pricing a little bit, how do we set pricing appropriately where we're still going to get business, we feel like we're being valued, but again, we're still going to get business, right?
Yeah. And I think pricing comes down, honestly, I think pricing comes down to marketing analysis and really understanding what your competitors are doing and how you differentiate from them. I think another thing that people often don't do is a low, medium, and high price. And the reality of it is, if you just give them one price, they might walk away because they're going to look for other prices. But if you actually create a proposal that has a low price, a medium price, and a high price, more often than not, that client's going to go with the medium price because they actually feel that you are showing them where their investment will go. And I think a lot of times when people send out proposals like venues or, photographers, caterers, they give them one choice. When you have the opportunity to say to the client, hey, listen, you want to rent my venue for 3 days, this is the price. But if you want something lower, you could actually rent it for just 2 days and it would be, it would take that away. Or if you need to go even higher and rent it for a whole week, then this would be the price. Giving them the option and bringing in more money to the venue or the vendor looking. Because if you end up saying, well, listen, I only need it for 1 day, great. Well, that means I can flip it and go get another client. Or I need it for 4 days, 5 days. Well, great. That means I'm going to charge basically what 2 clients would be, but now I only have 1. So it really is understanding who your market is and how you want to present yourself. And then coming at it from a standpoint of, do you want to be in the middle or do you want to be on the high end? A great example, and I can use me. I actually want to be known as the highest paid planner in the state that I am. And currently I am the highest paid planner because that gives me a bit of a mentality to those clients of, listen, if she's this high priced, it means that she's really worth it. And that means that she's doing something different other than the other planners. So that's kind of how I actually separate myself from the pack, is by having a really different pricing structure of, this is what I cost. It is not inexpensive. It is not middle ground. You have to be a luxury client to work with me.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense, especially given the fact that you want to take a limited number of weddings. And again, the way that you're building in that friction, because, you know, to your point, sometimes people who are willing to spend a lot of money also might have the feeling that they need to, like, they kind of want to get whatever they want, right? And you have some specific ways that you want to serve them. We had a staffing company for a while, and we were serving very high net worth individuals, billionaire families, and the focus is less on money and more on time and accessibility and things like that. And I'm sure, you know, that's similar for your clients as well. How do you draw the boundary there where you're trying to be accessible, you're trying to serve this incredible clientele, and also you want to have your own boundaries, your own guidelines of how you're willing to serve people?
Yeah. And honestly, I think this is where the entrepreneur, the business person has to sit down and really suss out who it is they are and what they want. And it's not just, you know, it doesn't have to do with just money. It has to do with, if you're going to take on X amount of clients, what happens to your family life? What happens to your life? Like, how are you going to make sure that you have good mental health? How are you going to make sure that you're sleeping properly, eating properly, taking the time that you need to do the things that help create that spark in you that you can then give to your clients? And I think there's a mentality in our industry that we just have to keep going. We have to book. And it's also, it's this really horrible scarcity mentality. And honestly, I have it every year. Like, I worry, am I going to book this year? Like, what happens if I don't? And my husband always reminds me, he's like, you know what? It's not below you. If you don't book, God forbid, that you go out and you get another job until you start booking again, you know? And I think that in our industry, the mentality of you have to be the best, you have to be better than everybody else, and you have to really be out there and show that you are making the money and doing all the things is something that we all do.
It's been interesting because I've had the pleasure on this show of talking to so many different types of pieces and different types of, you know, planners, DJs, caterers, so many different pieces of this industry, obviously with a heavy focus on venues. And one of the things that has been interesting to me is the different kind of mentalities and the different positioning and how people, like you said, entrepreneurial, right? Like how the entrepreneur wants to position themselves, what their strategy is going to be. And so this strategy definitely seems an incredible one for someone who wants to have a control over your schedule. Like you said, you've got to be able to charge the prices that you are worth to be able to do the weddings. And if it's going to be 100 weddings a year versus 10 weddings a year, your pricing is going to look different. Your infrastructure will look different. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that definitely makes a lot of sense. Well, Jaclyn, this was good talking about, I think it was an interesting way to weave together, talking a little bit about pricing, but also mental health. And I'm excited about, you know, people hearing this and kind of considering this information. It's definitely something, talking about mental health, talking about pricing, like we need to be talking about these things more.
We do. And it's something that we shouldn't be scared of talking about, you know, and I can say this, planners are a huge culprit of not talking about pricing. Like, we're all very scared of telling each other what we make and how much we charge, because we're afraid that other planner is going to either do a number that's lower than ours, outbid us. So it's really something that it would be great if at some point in the near future where we could all be on the same page, you know, if caterers of, you know, a certain stature of 15 years, they're going to charge X, Y, and Z, or planners, you know, they've been in it for over a decade. This is kind of the normal average pricing, or, you know, and everybody's different. We all have to start somewhere. I started out with a $500 wedding. That's all I got paid. And now, you know, I'm where I'm at in the field, and I'm not ashamed of that. And I work my patootie off for it, just as all of us do. And one of the biggest things that I see in creatives is that they are so tired after every wedding season. And I wish that everybody could just be on a high after every wedding season. And instead of feeling like, oh my God, I can't wait for the season to be done, I'm actually excited for the season to start at the end of my other season, because I know I only take a select few and I give myself that space and time and those boundaries that I need.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Well, Jaclyn, thank you so much for coming on, sharing with us today about that. And again, congrats on the CaterSource award. And I am excited for people to be able to get in touch with you if they're interested in that. And I want to make sure that's accessible to them. So what is the best place to connect with you if people want to reach out and hear more about what you do, or maybe even see you speak, in the upcoming seminars?
So definitely give me a shout via email, and you can get to my email right by my website, or give me a call. I'm completely accessible. And if you want to meet with me and talk with me, I want to meet and talk with you too.
Awesome. Awesome. Just for any of our audio listeners, do you mind saying out what your email is, or maybe even your social media handles?
Sure. So my email is Jackie, Jackie, at my company's name, Jaclyn Watson Events.com. And then my Instagram is at Jaclyn Watson Events. And so is my TikTok, which needs some serious work, but
ours does too. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on today, and excited for folks to hear this and just kind of consider some of these different topics that we talked about today.
Well, great. Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.